Welcome to eLibrary Solutions, India. So picture this, it's 1947. A brand new nation is born, and with it, a monumental question. How do you build an informed democracy for hundreds of millions of people, many of whom are just beginning their journey with literacy? For India's founders, a huge part of the answer was books. This is the incredible story of the ambitious, decades-long quest to build a nation of readers from the ground up.
So, let's dive into this amazing story. Here's our roadmap for today. First, we'll look at why libraries were considered so absolutely crucial right from the start. Then, we'll get into the ambitious blueprints they drew up. We'll meet the visionaries behind those plans, face the tough gap between the dream and the reality, and finally, we'll ask what the future holds for the Indian library in our digital age.
All right, let's start with the core problem, the big challenge. A democracy can't just run on votes alone, right? It needs its citizens to be informed, to be able to think critically. For a newly independent India, creating an educated public wasn't just some nice-to-have idea, it was an absolute necessity for survival and growth.
So this was the central question looming over the nation's leaders. And the scale of it was just staggering. We're not talking about dropping off a few boxes of books here and there. This needed a national vision, a massive logistical plan to get information into the hands of everyone, from people in the bustling cities to folks in the most remote villages.
This quote, right from the early planning documents, really gets to the heart of it all. From day one, libraries weren't seen as a luxury item. Nope, they were seen as a core social institution, just as essential as roads or schools for spreading knowledge and literally building the new nation.
Now, what's really interesting is that while India has this ancient, deep-rooted tradition of scholarship, the idea of a systematic national library system is actually surprisingly recent. You see, 1947 wasn't just a political shift, it was the firing of the starting gun for a massive public knowledge project.
So, how did they even begin to tackle this massive task? Well, with independence came a new era of centralized planning. Let's take a look at the very first concrete blueprints that were drawn up to turn this grand idea into a reality.
You see, India's entire development strategy was built around these huge national 5-year plans. And right from the very first one, libraries were not an afterthought. They were a key official part of the roadmap for the country's future.
And they moved fast. This wasn't just theory. In that very first 5-year plan, they hit the ground running. They established the National Library as a kind of anchor, they passed laws to get books into public hands, and they started building the very skeleton of a network that would hopefully connect the entire country.
Of course, behind every great plan, there are the people who dreamed it up. So now, let's meet some of the key thinkers and committees who drafted the incredibly detailed and often visionary blueprints for India's library network.
You really can't talk about Indian libraries without mentioning Dr. S.R. Ranganathan. He is often called the father of library science in India, and for good reason. His 1950 development plan was this incredible 30-year vision that became the foundational text for almost everything that came after. Then, in 1958, we have this pivotal moment. The Senior Committee released the first truly comprehensive national report on public libraries. You can think of it like a doctor's checkup for the entire system. It diagnosed all the problems and prescribed a very specific cure. And this slide just shows you how comprehensive their vision really was. They designed a whole ecosystem. They imagined a network growing from the village level all the way up, a system for sharing books between libraries, a dedicated tax on property to actually pay for it all, and a real focus on training the professionals who would run the whole thing.
Okay, so you fast forward through a few decades of thinking and planning, and it all leads to this, NAPLIS. This 1986 policy was designed to be the master plan, the one integrated vision that would guide the development of all types of libraries, from your local school library to the most advanced scientific one.
And this policy was incredibly ambitious. It wasn't just about dusty books on shelves anymore, it was about using information to power the country's future. It aimed to boost the economy, to bring in modern technology, to train a whole new generation of librarians, and to create a national commission to make sure it all actually happened. So, we have these brilliant, comprehensive plans on paper, but as we all know, a blueprint is one thing. Actually building the house is a whole other story. Now we have to turn from that grand vision to the much more complicated story of what actually happened on the ground. In this slide, using the report's own words really shows the gap perfectly. The vision was for this smooth, integrated national system. The reality? Well, it was often uneven, piecemeal and uncoordinated. Thanks to funding challenges, shifting political priorities, and just sheer bureaucratic complexity, progress wasn't the beautiful, synchronized machine the planners had designed.
And this quote right here points to where that gap between vision and reality was perhaps the most painful. Even though education was a national priority, school libraries, the very places where a love of reading is supposed to begin, were, in the report's own words, a neglected lot.
Just let that number sink in for a moment. 41%. According to a major national survey, that was the percentage of all recognized schools in the country that had any library facilities at all, which, if you flip that around, means almost 60% of schools had nothing.
And if we break that number down, the problem becomes even clearer, even starker. This chart shows that while most older students in secondary school had a library, access was lowest at the most critical levels. Less than a third of primary schools, where kids first learned to read, had a library. It's a tough statistic to see.
But the story doesn't just end with these challenges. As technology began to change the world, it also started to change the vision for what a library could be. Our final section looks at how the focus shifted towards the new demands of the information age. The new buzzwords became modernization and networking. The thinking shifted from just building more brick-and-mortar libraries to using technology, computers, communication tech, multimedia, to connect them all into a powerful national grid of information.
So the roadmap for the future was essentially a three-step plan. First, modernize the hardware and software. Second, use all that new tech to network the libraries into one giant, searchable database for the whole country. And third, and this is so crucial, train the librarians, the people who run the libraries, to manage this new information age.
Which brings us right up to today. This journey from physical shelves to digital networks has been a long one, filled with grand ambitions and some very difficult realities. And it leaves us with a final crucial question. In an age where information seems to be everywhere, what is the next chapter for the library in India's ongoing story?
Thank you for listening, and do subscribe to our channel for more.